everybody, I'm Natalia Bonner. Welcome to Let's Stitch a Year of Stars block number 8. Today we're going to be piecing the Midnight Star. Alright, so if you haven't been sewing along with me over the last, all year long, I have been sharing Let's Stitch a Year of Stars piecing edition. So this awesome quilt behind me, I actually have an online stitch along where I teach you at the first of every month how to machine quilt one of these blocks. But quickly after we started this fun stitch along, I realized that a lot of you wanted to actually piece your own blocks too. So we decided that it would be fun to share these piecing videos with you and hopefully inspire each of you on your own piecing journey. Now, I'm by far no perfectionist when it comes to piecing, but if there's anything you can take from these, hopefully it's just maybe a little bright spot in your day or something fun to get you going. All right, so before I actually get to the piecing, you will want to make sure that you start out by cutting all of your fabrics. Now you can find the step-by-step cutting directions in our workbook, which is called Let's Stitch a Year of Stars. It's the piecing workbook. After you get all of your fabrics cut, then you will be ready to start sewing. I cut all of my fabrics for this block using 3 fat quarters. All right, now that I have them all cut out, you can see here I've got my awesome triangles. Now I have gone through and laid out my fabrics just to make sure that I have everything exactly where it needs to be and make sure that I actually sew the right fabrics together. So we're going to start out here today sewing a few triangles together. Now as I'm sewing here, the number one question that I get asked about piecing is, where did you get that cute little featherweight? I have all the details about my fun machine in the description below. Now I also have my seam allowances all set at 1/4 inch, and the fabrics that I'm using here are Kona cottons. So I'm starting out by sewing 2 of my triangles together. Now as you can see, I lay my triangles out and make sure that I sew the correct sides together. It's really easy to accidentally sew the wrong sides when it comes to these triangles. All right, a little bit of chain piecing. I should have 2 of those triangles sewn together. Let's clip those apart and then press towards the dark. I like to use a little bit of the flatter when I'm pressing. Just helps me keep my blocks nice and flat. Be really careful, you're working on the bias with these triangles, so you want to make sure that you don't distort any of your fabrics. Now, if you press towards the dark when you're making these blocks, then when you go to nest the blocks together, when you piece them together, your seams should just butt up right together and help create almost perfect points. Like I said, I'm by far from perfect, so that's definitely not something I'm going to be doing over here. Okay, so I can see here that they're going to line up perfectly. Because I don't sew with pins, just personal choice, I'm not a perfectionist, I'll line up so that I can see that those seams are nesting right together, line my fabrics up, and then stitch 1/4 inch line. You can see here I have a little bit of painter's tape on my featherweight. I like to use the painter's tape to give me a nice, I actually use several layers of it and get a nice kind of edge to butt up against. Yes, I know there's lots of products out there that you can use for this, but personally I just keep going back to the painter's tape. Generally, I do take that tape off between quilts just to make sure it doesn't cause any damage to my machine. Now let's spritz that. Now, when in your workbook, if you're following along, you'll see that your center fabrics, or the fabrics recommended, are a yellow fabric, a blue fabric, and a light pink background fabric. So the fabrics I'm using for this block, I am using a little bit different color palette. The only reason is because I've already used that color palette in this original panel. So I just wanted to mix it up and make it a little bit different. So I'm using the orange here in place of my blue, and I'm using the gray here in place of my pink. So once I have that first block, that first hourglass block done, I am going to set that aside. You could square this up to 4.5 inches at that point. Okay, now we need to make a few more of those units. So moving on, we're going to make some pink and gold units, but I'm using yellow and gray here in place of those colors. So just like we did with step 1, we're going to make a few of these, and I am going to chain piece the next 2 steps together. So placing my 2 triangles together and then sewing 1/4 inch. Now, if I lay mine down like I have here and lay all my blocks out, it really does help me make sure that I sew the correct sides together. All right, let's clip those apart and press again towards the dark. Now that I have all of those pieced together, then we're going to finish off those hourglass blocks. So make sure they nest together. Butt up those seams, and then we'll stitch those together. So the thread that I'm using here to piece these blocks is so fine. That's what I use on the top and also in my bobbin. I really love the fine thread. I actually use it for my machine quilting as well. I use it for piecing and quilting, and I've had great success with it, so that's what I'm going to stick with. We do have most of the notions and other things of pattern here available for purchase on our website, pieceandquilt.com. And while I'm talking about those things, make sure you do check out our online Facebook group. We like to call it a Facebook community, but in that group, we share our progress every month, and we also have a lot of fun giveaways. So make sure you join that group and share your progress. So now I have 2 more of those hourglass blocks. So these ones would be my pink and my gold. Now let's make 2 more of those. This time, however, we're going to be using, so this would be my pink, this is my gold, this would be blue where I have orange, and then another gold. So we're going to make 2 more of those blocks. Now when you're sewing these, make sure you sew on the correct side. I think it's easy to want to sew down that longer side, but just make sure, lay them out, make sure you sew the correct sides together. All right, let's trim those and press again. Now let's finish off those hourglass blocks. Make sure that they're going to nest together just like we'd planned. Let's press these two after these are squared up to 4.5 inches. Then we'll be ready to put this block together. What a fun, simple block. All right, let's put this block together. I am going to actually start out here making my center row. So for my center row, I'm going to use these two hourglass blocks, the two that have 3 colors. Those will go on the outside, and then we'll use our center one, which has the orange on the center. Now this is a point, if you are a little bit more of a perfectionist than me, you could pin right here to make sure those seams line up nicely. Another thing that you can use is a little tiny dab of school glue, like a glue stick. Dab it on there, make sure your seams are pressed together, and then you just sew right along. That tape or that glue, I actually like to use like a glue stick. It'll just wash out when you wash the quilt. So we've got those first 2 sewn. Now let's sew on the opposite sides. Remember, we want to make sure that those oranges are touching, or they would be your blues. Fabulous. Okay, now that we've got those sewn together, I am going to press, and we're going to press these rows going in towards the center. I know the 2 outside rows, they're going to have solid blocks on the outside, so I'm going to press those to the outside, which lets me know the center ones need to be pressed towards the center so that my seams will all nest together really nicely. Okay, so I've got my center row all pieced together. Let's set that aside for just a short minute while we finish up these other 2 rows. So we're going to now make 2 rows, top and bottom, that will have an hourglass block, and then on each side of that hourglass block, we will sew one of our solids, which would be your blue. We'll sew one of those solid squares to the outside of each of those. Now, I'm going to do just a little bit of chain piecing to sew these together. And once we have those clipped apart, we're going to sew one more square to the opposite side. And I just realized that I sewed this one to the wrong side. So I'll be unpicking for a second. I tell you guys to lay everything out so you make sure you sew it to the wrong side, and then I sew it to the wrong side. It happens. And now we'll sew that final side on. Let's head over and press towards those solid blocks. All right, you should have 2 rows that look like that. Now we're going to put the block together. So we're going to start by sewing one of the top or bottom rows to the side of the center row, making sure that those seams nest together closely. And now that we've got one sewn on, let's add the final one. So you can see here, because I don't pin, I start out by making sure that my seams are right where they need to be, nested together at the intersections. And then from there, I just kind of smooth out my fabric and make sure it lays together nicely. But you definitely could pin if you chose to. And let's give this one final press. And there you have it, the Midnight Star. This one was so much fun and fast to piece. I hope you all found a little bit of inspiration from this video. Make sure that you do share your blocks in our Facebook group. It's called Let's Stitch a Year of Stars. And then I'll be back on the 1st of the month to show you exactly how I machine quilted this block. Have a great day, everybody.